The story of Solitude is a very complex one. Like most buildings that are as old as this one is, it's had a lot of changes that have occurred over time. And it was a great privilege to be able to work on this building for almost as long as it's been in existence. I started working on it in 1983. And so we've come a long way. We're not quite all the way there yet, but it's getting pretty close. We can see the end in sight of having it really represent the periods that it dates from. The very beginning of Solitude is connected intimately with the Preston family, as the building is throughout its history. This site on which the house is located was part of the Barger grant that was part of the Draper's Meadow settlement in the 1750s, or 40s, I guess it is. Don't have all my dates exactly after all these years, but the property was purchased from the Bargers in 1803 by James Patton Preston, who was William Preston's son. It's obviously very close to the Smithfield, to the Preston home, and we don't know exactly who built the house. Obviously, it was built a little bit before the date of the deed, but it seems sensible to think that this was built as a dependency of sorts to Smithfield, rather than as a much earlier. The Bargers really had lost their connection with it pretty much by the time the 1801 came around. So we've done dendrochronology, which means we've sampled all the dates in the logs of which the building is made, and this building came in at 1801. So what you see before you is this section of the house. These two windows up and down form a log dwelling. Sometimes people call those log cabins, but this is not a log cabin. There are really no log cabins left. Log cabins were they were semi, as what the university once called the parking lot behind the high school building, a semi-temporary parking lot. Which meant we would never play kickball there again, or whatever we were doing there. But they were semi-temporary buildings. They didn't have floors, they didn't have proper roofs. They had a weatherboard, essentially, roof, and they had wooden chimneys with clay-daubed wooden chimneys. So cabins really were a very basic form of housing. This, however, like all the log houses we see in the landscape today, is a dwelling house. It's a much more substantial and valuable and expensive dwelling, carefully finished on the inside and the outside. So what we have here is a one-room log house with an interior brick chimney, or I mean, I say brick, it could have been stone because it's not there anymore, but probably brick, built into the dwelling. We'll show you when you get inside how that chimney fits into the actual form of the building, but it's really kind of fascinating because the closets that flank the chimney are still there, but the chimney's gone. It was probably weatherboarded from the very beginning. We don't know for sure, but many of these buildings were either whitewashed or weatherboarded so that they would look like a masonry house in the landscape. The idea that you'd have logs with this very colored effect that we get today was not part of the program for the folks who built this. They wanted to have a permanent looking house, and so they would either side it for preservation or they would whitewash it to look solid. The building had one room on the first floor and one room on the second floor, and some sort of stair or ladder stair to get upstairs. We don't know exactly where that was. This house was probably erected for Granville Smith, who was William Preston's uncle-in-law. Mrs. Preston's uncle from Hanover County or Goochland County, Virginia, was a prominent member of society in the Richmond area, pretty wealthy guy, but he was apparently up here helping to manage the Horseshoe Plantation and other properties for Mrs. Preston after the death of the Colonel. So he needed a place to live. This was pretty remote, and so we presume he called it Solitude. And in fact, we have a letter from him dated from Solitude. So it's unquestionably, this is his name for the place. It was pretty far from Richmond, and that's probably what he was thinking about. In 1834, oh, I should add, this house was used by him when he was in the area. He died in, I believe, in 1806, not too long after that. And the property, however, stayed in his family until 1816, when it was purchased by James Patton Preston from the estate of Granville Smith. It was then used as a secondary residence for Preston family members. It was actually rented by Letitia Floyd and John Floyd, and they lived here in the teens for several years. And we have some letters and diary references to that time of occupancy. The house then was altered in the 1830s to make it a more commodious dwelling, and also to make it more fashionable and up-to-date. Instead of being a one-room house, which is essentially what William Preston lived in Botetourt County before he moved up here, even the wealthiest people lived in one-room houses. Greenfield was apparently just one room. Isn't that right, Francis? I think. So what we have here is an enlargement into a more fashionable kind of dwelling. Instead of facing this way, the front door would have been here. We don't know exactly where it is because we haven't been able to open that wall up. Probably right in the middle. They've moved the front door into the center of the south-facing facade, and they've added windows so that it begins to look kind of like the front of Smithfield, or like another center passage house with a central hall and rooms on either side. So even though they haven't quite got the roof thing worked out, it kind of has that formal appearance, and it's more capacious. And this was done in about 1834. And when you go inside, you'll see beautiful wainscoting, a nice stair, and a very handsome mantelpiece, which we discovered. We knew it was there, but we figured it out. It was in this upstairs bedroom. It fit perfectly between the chair rails, and it fit perfectly the size of the firebox. So it's undoubtedly was the main fireplace or mantle from this first floor room, which was probably the bedroom, the master bedroom of the house. Generally on the first floor you'd have one main room and a master bedroom, so that you didn't have to heat too many rooms in order to keep going. The upstairs would have been a secondary pair of bedrooms. The passage between the two is a frame construction, not log, but it doesn't ever appear to have been what you call a dog trot, where you have an open passage between two log pens. It seems to have always been enclosed. Most of the woodwork in there is original to 1834. 1859, I think it's 1851 or 52, James Patton Preston died, and his son Robert Preston had probably already moved about that time into Solitude. His brothers had fabulous houses. One of them had Smithfield, the other one had the house that's been known as Whitethorn, across 460 in the Heathwood development. Yes, the Heathwood development. And they maintained big households with lots of parties. The stories go that they had a sort of road network so that you could go from one house to the other without ever leaving Preston property. So Robert Preston wanted to keep up with that style of life, so he had to make something out of this, what he found here that would live up to his brother's way of life. So what he did was he took the one-room building and he enclosed it inside a new big 5-bay center passage plan dwelling. So it's still in there right in this section, but he raised the roof and added this hipped roof on top. And as you see when you go inside, the floor level is lower because they didn't raise the floor level. So the ceiling height and the floor level, you have to go down when you go into that room from the center passage. And the windows are so high you have to sort of stand on tiptoe to see out of them, because they're designed to create the impression of a building that was built as this was in 1859. He didn't want you to even know there was a log building left inside of it. The back wing just filled in as an L to the rear. There were many outbuildings, of which we were lucky to have 2. The kitchen we have a little bit of information about, but no good photograph. The kitchen stood somewhere right in this area, right close to the house. We have the spring house over here, which was connected by a little waterway that's been enlarged in recent years to Strubles Creek. I should also add that in about 1816, James Patton Preston built a mill at Smithfield, and we believe this upper duck pond is the Smithfield Mill Pond. It's actually not, it was here long before the duck pond was landscaped as a park in the 1920s. So what we end up with is this great house, but we've had to take off the chimney that was on the other end and move it to this end and to make a symmetrical composition. So in doing so, we really weakened the structure, particularly in the middle there. And also you may notice we're kind of in a waterlogged bottom here, not far from Strubles Creek, but when they created the duck pond, of course, the water level came up even more. So that the basement here is not far above the level of the duck pond. So, and then when the central heat was put in, they had to create a basement. There was no basement before. So creating the basement created even more possibility for water infiltration. The building was used, I think 40 acres were acquired with the building as the original agricultural farm for the Virginia Agricultural and Mechanical College. So, and it appears that Robert Preston was actually the first farm manager of the farm, which is kind of an interesting thing to know. The Prestons came out of the Civil War in poverty. They had lost everything, and they actually lost Solitude, but they were allowed to keep on living here for life, I guess, under the terms of the sale to the Virginia Agricultural Mechanical College. So they were impoverished. Robert Preston died in the, I forget exactly what year now, but in the early 1870s, after the school was mid-1870s, and his wife Mary lived on into the 1880s and had left a very sparse but very telling inventory of her property. And so what you see gradually beginning inside is a recreation of the Preston inventory, at least in the parlor, since this is a building that gets used all the time, it's using furniture that's reproduction furniture so it can be used and not have to worry about 1850s Belter sofas and chairs being damaged. So the building then, after the death of the Prestons, was used for professors' residences. Many different professors lived here and raised their families here. And it was an infirmary at one point, the school infirmary, and then by the mid-20th century it segued into use as a classroom building and ended up as a laboratory building with asbestos pipes and all sorts of concrete floors that were added in various spots that had to be removed, just added over the wooden floors. So holes had been cut, and repairs had been spotty and very irregular in the cellar, and moisture had been just building up. We found in the 1980s and 90s that the moisture levels were too high to not allow a lot of rot to spread. So by the time Anita and her predecessor Jean Haskell Spear got involved here, the building was in terrible shape and really looked like a knockdown, and I think many at the higher echelons of the university would just as soon have done that with it, because it's a troublesome kind of a problem when you have a building that's in this rough shape. But Jean and Anita did a great job and came up with the nickname, the university's home place, to describe it, and over many years were able to finally convince the university and raise the money to get this restoration done. So I'm supposed to talk mostly about the restoration, so I'll try to do it, but it's hard when you can't actually see what I'm pointing at. But we'll have tours in a minute in smaller groups, and we can see actually what happened. I'll put up a few pictures of the building as well. This is an early 20th century photograph, and one of my favorite parts of it is that the building had a different flowering vine on every column, on purpose, like a trumpet vine, different sorts of flowering vines that would bloom at different times with different colors, which I think is kind of neat. I don't know where I read that, but I remember finding that in somebody's description. Here it is during World War II, during the GI occupation of the site. It was surrounded by trailers that were put up for the GIs. And you can see they used the building as a social hall and laundry. So there's some laundry hanging out. And then here we have it in the 1960s when it was the Hockey Club. It was the Alumni Center for the university. And we have a lot of really good photographs taken at that time that were very helpful in some of the work we did. One of the most interesting bits we did was these columns had all been replaced with 2x8s that were just nailed together. And the capitals were all wrong. So how to recreate this capital when all the photographs get real fuzzy when you get down to that level of detail. We were looking, after many, many times of looking through the photographs that are in special collections from the 60s, we found one photograph taken inside, but you could see the column capital through the side light here. And it was so clear that we were able to recreate the detail. But otherwise, we would have been sort of guessing. That was kind of fun. So the column capitals were all gone. The shutters had been here when I was a student. I used to enjoy walking from the architecture building down. There was a path that came right to the porch, and you just go off and go on a walk out into the country. And the shutters were all here, but they'd all been put in storage. Many of them were in really rough shape. The roof had had a lot of problems and leaked a good deal. The plaster, I should also point out the architectural form of the building. This is one of about 32 center passage plan grand houses in the county. And this one is like only one other one in the county, I'm trying to say, the Earhart House in Ellett has a plastered ceiling and walls, just like this does, and wainscoting. So this is a really kind of interesting treatment of an outside space as if it was an inside space. It's only one other example of this that I've ever seen, and it's very innovative and interesting that they would think that the porch was kind of like an inside entertaining space because they've treated it like one. So convincing everybody that we needed to preserve the plaster ceiling instead of ripping it down, because it's the original ceiling. It needed a lot of work, but we kept that. We had to come up with a period of interpretation for the building. So it has had many changes, as you'll see inside. Bathrooms have been inserted, flooring has been changed, all over the building, different changes. So we finally settled on a date of interpretation from 1872, when the university was founded, until about 1920 or 10, when the first bathroom was installed upstairs. And so that we can interpret the building as the home place of the university, as well as the home of the Prestons in their old age. But we're not trying to restore it back to some Greek Revival imaginary period. We don't have enough information to even do that. And the idea being it's a functional building being used by the university as a classroom and seminar and office space as well. We determined that the parlor here, which is the formal room of the Prestons, would be restored as closely as possible eventually. And all the other rooms would be more pragmatically furnished so they could be used on a regular basis without worrying about the furnishings. We kept all the 20th century light fixtures that we could find. There weren't many, early 20th century. And then everywhere else we just put in track lighting or simple modern lights. We didn't try to recreate that. Wherever a door is being used in not an original location, we put modern hardware on it, like the two bathrooms have modern hardware on them, in keeping with the Secretary of the Interior's standards for historic preservation projects, where you try to make the old legible from the new. Throughout the whole house, we tried to restore all the plaster that we could. We didn't rip down plaster or pull out wainscoting, and it was an extra effort that I think really paid off in the end. The floors, this building, in this room, they were using this as a classroom in what, like 2000 still? When was it they last, 1990, I guess.
Before I came.
Well, still in 1990, they were still using this as a classroom, and it was completely unsafe for any kind of group of people to gather because the joists, which were sort of logs, were all rotten, and the floor was rotted. So in the end, the university pulled out the floor in there and replaced it well before this restoration project occurred, and did a very nice job. we did make the decision to enclose the entry, the back porch, to form an entry foyer so that there would be a place where you could use as circulation to get from one part of the house to another without going through any of the rooms, so that you can get around, and then the bathroom is in what was an early pantry at the end of that porch. It had been converted into a dark room. Is there anything else that you can think of? The basement was a big deal. We had to hand dig the basement. The building was right on top of the ground under the back wing, and so crawling around back in there was really difficult. There was a lot of termite damage, a lot of rot. So we were able to, using shovels and they kind of winched it out on little canvas, they'd pile some up and then pull it out. But it lowered the floor in there several feet so that problem wouldn't be an ongoing problem. We added ventilation so the basement can be kept moisture free as long as the people using the building remember to open the vents in the summer and close them in the winter. And the other great thing about this building is that this is a kind of model for how to do historic buildings. Smithfield, many, many years ago, decided to go with air conditioning, which involved a lot of damage to the building in order to put all those ducts in there. It's caused enormous problems with moisture sheeting down the walls at one point many years ago. It's all adjusted now, but at one time it caused some real humidity problems. It has an inherent tendency to be dangerous to have all that moisture differential between the outside and the inside that's caused by cooling and dehumidifying the inside and then having it humid and hot on the outside. You end up creating a condensation point where the two realms meet. And so you'll end up with, if you don't have the right kind of moisture barrier, with water sheeting down your wall or sitting inside the windows between the storm window and the window. A lot of problems there. Sort of the way to restore buildings that I really tend to incline towards now. Oh, I should add that one of the reasons that Smithfield needed that was to get grants. They had to be to demonstrate that they were conserving their collection correctly. And the collection is seen as more important than the building. And in Smithfield, that's 50% true because Smithfield's collection is very significant, although the number of actual Preston pieces is not as great as in the total aggregate of all the furniture. But here, there's no historic furniture at this point, at least, other than a magnificent corner cupboard, which you'll get the chance to see. But so the opportunity here was to treat the building as our primary resource, our most important artifact, and not to create these stresses within the building fabric caused by humidity and changes of temperature, but let the building live in the environment in which it finds itself. So this building is not air conditioned, and it has the old-fashioned hot water radiators, and as a result the windows need to be opened and in the summertime, and it's a building that breathes, and I think that will be in the long term in its best interest. I think the staff using it may occasionally be uncomfortable, but but it's really a wonderful thing. If we had tried to thread all the different ducts through, we were going to be coming through these porch spaces and so on. And so we didn't have to do that. So there's much less damage to the building. That was it's really gratifying, and I'm anxious to hear how well that works out in the long run. It's a nice climate here. It only gets hot for a couple of weeks. So the window restoration. Well, the windows are all in fairly decent shape because they were all protected by traditional storm windows. And that's another thing that a lot of times in historic buildings you'll go to a lot of expense to have interior storm windows that are placed that have to be removed and cleaned and so forth. It's sort of the latest way of thinking is that the windows are magnificent bits of craftsmanship. They're mortise and tenon together. They're part of the original building. So we need to protect them. So we just went with standard, off-the-shelf, well, they were custom made for this, but standard pre-finished storm windows, triple track. So we can ventilate in the summer, and we can protect our sash all forever, as long as they're on there. The sash will not be subject to a lot of damaging weather. Downstairs, we didn't have that problem because we got the porch, so we were able to leave the windows so you can see the light reflecting off the sash, off the glass, And we have screens in the windows so that we can raise and lower the windows. The windows that were in bad shape, were the ones on the south side that were up where the porch is, and they were in terrible condition. We actually treated them like furniture. We rebuilt them using epoxy and new materials so that they're the same sash from 1834, but they're reconstituted because they were really in rough shape from all that rain over the years, bouncing off the roof.
Who did you find to do the craftsmanship?
Well, we were lucky that we had to go through the regular procurement process. This is not, it's not like a private job where you can hire anybody you want. We were very lucky that we got two good contractors, one for the inside and one for the outside, and both of them did a beautiful job, hired the craftsmen within their organizations to do the things that needed to be done really well. And that's why we're lucky. That doesn't always happen with these public procurement where you have to take the lowest bidder. Did you? I thought I saw a hand, sorry.
The windows are original then?
The windows are all original, except for, I don't know if you recall, there used to be a door that led into the back wing, if anybody remembers the building well. There was an old storm door and a glass pane door from the 50s that went into the back wing. We found one photograph, I don't have that one here, but one photograph that showed that there was originally a window there. So we reproduced that window and closed that door, which we didn't need because that's the curator's office. We didn't want an exterior door there. So we did put one new window in.
These windows don't have sash weights then? They're just, do they?
They actually, a lot of them do have sash weights. In the 1850s they did, but not all of them. The ones in the 1830s ones don't.
Do they have little devices for holding the window up?
They do have little, they did originally have these little special little iron things that pulled out, but we didn't try to restore them. They didn't work anymore, and that was not possible within the procurement process to get that detailed. We felt really pleased that we got the original shutters repaired all over the building. There were some that weren't reparable, so there are a few windows where we don't have shutters at all because we didn't have in the budget to build new shutters. So we just didn't, we tried to distribute the shutters to where they would show to the best effect on the building.
Could you comment on the roof?
The roof is the original roof would have been a wood shake or shingle roof, probably shingle roof, and from 1859, and that was replaced probably in the 19-teens. You can see the shake roof on this photograph shows the wood roof. That's a late 19th century photograph. Most houses around this area had what's called a standing seam metal roof put on in the 1915, 1925 era, somewhere around there. We don't know exactly when that went on. And this is that roof. We made a choice. We had, in the original documents, we were going to replace the roof, but we realized we would be more efficient with the money that we had a limited budget to repair the roof rather than to replace it. And I'm glad we did because it's a block tin roof, which is made of small pieces of turn-coated iron, and it's not, you can't get that anymore. What we get today wouldn't look like this at all. If you look at the back of the back porch, you'll see what a modern university craftsman installed roof looks like. Those are really nice turn metal roofs done by university roofers in recent years, whereas this front porch and the upper one are the early 20th century block tin roofs, and I'm glad they're there.
What about the outbuilding?
The outbuilding shows up in several old photographs and in plans of the university. It had a brick top chimney at the far end. It's a log, you can see it over here. It's a log building, probably always covered with beaded weatherboard, but it has a weatherboard now that dates from the early 20th century. The wing was added in the 1870s, I think, and it's a board and batten wing. That building appears to have been occupied by a slave of the family as a residential accommodation. It may have had a function on the first floor like a wash house. But the chimney is gone, we really don't know. But undoubtedly the second floor was a slave residence, and it's typical. It's actually very nicely finished, as would be typical. By the 1850s, slaves were being housed in well finished spaces, relatively speaking, compared to what was done in the early 19th century. Ideas of hygiene and of comfort had penetrated even into the slave quarters of the domestic servants by the 1850s. So that was where the cook lived in the later years. During the early 20th century, it was the cook's house, so it probably always was the cook's house. I didn't mention, sorry, we restored that one some years ago at great, if you recall, there was a big roof built over it that lasted for years and years. It was very controversial. The university did the work themselves, and it's pretty good. I think they did a nice job. They had to do a lot of work because it was in really bad shape. The front porch, I'm still disappointed with. There was one remaining beautifully turned half column. It had really nice little columns on it. And one of those survived and it got trashed in the restoration, and I'm still looking for a photograph that shows it well so that we could reproduce those columns the next time we need to do that for the building, because they would really add to the appearance of the building. One other interesting feature of the house is that this is a very sophisticated use of pattern books. The pattern, this little Greek pattern around the window upstairs, comes from a particular plate from Asher Benjamin's pattern book of the 1830s. It's one of the most basic sources of all the Greek Revival domestic architecture and church architecture you see in the Valley of Virginia. All comes from that one plate, and it's of an order for of an economical order for those who don't want to spend too much. So it's a use of the Greek Revival that's very simple, and you can see the same thing with these very plain column pilasters here. Those all are derived ultimately from Asher Benjamin's economical order.
Well, you didn't have to turn anything.
That's right. But you also even the moldings are more or less bevel moldings with a very slight, very elegant little curve to them. So any other questions?
People ask about the flooring in here. It's not original. Do you know when it was added?
You mean in this room?
In this front cabin?
I think that probably may very well be the original flooring.
From 1801, 2, 3?
Mm-hmm.
I think?
Mm-hmm.
Really?
I don't see any reason not to think so.
What wood is it?
I don't know. I don't remember. It's been a long time since I've been working on it, since 1983. So I don't remember. We can go look and I can tell you. A lot of work had to be done. That floor, there was a carpet down in there, and during the period while we were studying what to do with the building, the termites ate the floor up under the carpet. Just under the carpet. So we had to, you'll see a big patch right in the middle of the floor. The carpet was holding the moisture in from the basement. Part of the original plan here was to landscape the grounds so that we could integrate Solitude as a part of the university campus and part of the duck pond without having it just kind of blend into the duck pond as it does now. It needs to have a little bit of a setting that's domestic and not like a park. So one of our plans was to have, there's a photograph that may be one of these that shows a fence, and there in fact was a road that ran right in front of Smithfield. Like every house is on a road, you know, people didn't want to have to plow their long driveways. So their main road to Smithfield ran right here, and there was a fence. So we could reconstruct a small enclosure around the house that would approximate that fence, that would then set the house off and provide us with an opportunity to do a garden, a vegetable garden, something like that. And it works it very nicely. It's all laid out to go out to the parking lot in the back. And it gives the house a ground to set on and not just a sort of sitting here in this kind of strange way in the landscape.